So I've called my talk An Interdisciplinary Planet because I think interdisciplinarity has a distinct relation to our changing planet, an evolving planet. So I'm going to begin with a video, if I may. So to borrow a line, disciplines discipline disciples, or at least they used to. Strict divisions between academic disciplines are somehow a relic of a time in which, at least in theory, the agency of humans and non-humans, those things that we used to call natural, could clearly be distinguished. On closer inspection, such distinctions were always, of course, illusory. Humans and their environment have always been engaged in acts of co-constitution. Our subjectivity is both enabled, but also constrained our perception of the non-human world, while the physical dynamics of that world have provided us with an unfolding pageant. The observation of this pageant allowed the scientifically minded, as 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas noted, to use their senses of reason to discern God-given natural laws, a basis from which, in succeeding centuries, philosophers could formulate general principles or laws of nature, fundamental knowledge about the non-human or natural world that, as ever, was mediated through our myriad human subjectivities. The solidity of these laws depended on the fiction that the human and natural were in some way distinct, that humans stood outside of natural history, and that human history marched at a different tempo to that of nature. The overheated dynamics of human history, according to historian Fernand Braudel, played out on an almost timeless stage, that of nature. But Braudel wrote this in the 1950s when, unknown to him, the Earth had begun to transform in unimaginable ways. Great accelerations in energy and resource use, catalyzed by a Second World War, and which continued into the Cold, allowed human population to boom, spreading a distinct form of fossil fuel development far beyond the capitalist world. This acceleration, multiplication, and expansion of human appetites has resulted in a world transformed, a new condition in which humans, as a species, even according to normally stringently apolitical geologists, have become a fundamental geological agent, an accidental anthroposphere that is transforming the hydro, litho, and atmosphere, as Carlina noted, beyond the conditions in which most of known human history has played out. How do we know this? In 1935, C.S. Pigott was the first geologist to pull a core out of the earth. He used a cannon to shoot a hollow metal bullet deep into the Atlantic seabed between Newfoundland and Ireland. The so-called Pigott gun was fired from the deck of a Western Union ship, the Lord Kelvin, a ship which normally traveled the oceans laying telegraph cable. Suitably embedded, Pigott and his crew pulled out a circular tube of Earth history, as if it were a stubborn cork stuck in a wine bottle. But this cork was 10 foot long, and it contained myriad layers of sediment, providing an historical record of Earth's changing geomorphological cycles, its changing temperature, and its nutrient cycles over many thousands of years. It's such cores that provide evidence of the affirmation of an entirely new geological epoch. Anywhere such libraries are ripped out of the earth, their laminations contain signs of human environmental impact, from drifts of particulate ash to trace radiation of split atoms, or more recently, the planetary snowfall of plastic microparticles. So what does this mean for those cycles we once considered the outcomes of immutable laws of nature? To some extent, we have hijacked them. The rhythms of the hydrological cycle have been interrupted by vast concrete dams. The atmosphere has been permeated with the molecular record of fossil-fueled industrialism, and mineral cycles, such as those of nitrogen, silicon, and carbon, have been accelerated and distorted by industrialism and industrial chemistry. All that was once solid has melted into air, and this same air now poisons us and over-insulates the Earth. In 1923, a young professor at the US's first geography department, Harlan Barrows, argued that rather than philosophy, it was the discipline of geography that was truly the mother of the sciences. This was because the systematic study of the Earth, the ology of the geo, which could be traced back to antiquity, had led to the creation of the sciences of astronomy, botany, and zoology, amongst others. Areas of inquiry had become specializations, which in turn, and with sufficient gravity, had broken off from the whole to form free-floating sciences. For geographers, the split had been between physical and human geography. One took the physicality of the Earth as its subject, the other the dynamism of its people. Barrows thought both could be replaced by a new science of human ecology, the study of, and I quote, the relationships between natural environments and the distribution and activities of man, to use the gendered referent of the time. His idea emphasized the need for the study of humans' adjustment to their environment, rather than the environment's determination of human life. This placed him at odds with the mainstream of geographic thought, which at the time sought to absolve society for its racism, its inequalities, and its exploitative tendencies by affirming the idea that the environment, rather than human decision-making, was what ultimately determined differences between people. To counter this, Burroughs thought that researchers should focus upon the direct and intimate relations that humans had with their environment, employing ideas from sociology, hydrology, economics, geology, planning, and design. This was more than just talk. Burroughs put this call for interdisciplinarity into practice, helping imagine an integrated regional conservation system based on real topographic and hydrological conditions. He even envisioned turning the entire Mississippi River Basin, including the Great Lakes, into a vast total conservation system, like a massively scaled up Tennessee Valley Authority. Erosion, drought, and flood, alongside the dust storms that tore through the nation at this time, seemed to present an existential threat to the US, a national ecological crisis this time, rather than a planetary one. Interdisciplinarity was central to the perceived solutions of this New Deal era, and what people like Burroughs offered were visionary plans for what human ecologies could become. The next wave of interdisciplinarity came in the 1970s, with the federal government as its central actor. Since the end of the war, the US National Science Foundation had prided itself on funding research that plunged ever deeper into the endless frontier of fundamental scientific knowledge. The emphasis was on basic science, knowledge about the universe that may or may not have practical use for society at large. The archetypal basic science was particle physics, in which minute quantities of matter were accelerated with great force using vast electromagnets. Like subterranean running tracks, this tore particles apart to reveal ever more esoteric constituents of the material universe. Again, Chicago played a role. The Tevatron particle accelerator, built in Batavia, Illinois, in the late 1960s, was designed with cathedral-like architecture, designed to reflect the laws of symmetry which structure the material universe. However, even as the accelerator was built, criticisms were raised. For hippies, such research demonstrated the technocratic excesses of the US state, where for conservatives, it marked a dereliction of the federal government's duty to spend tax revenue in a responsible way. Diverse constituencies called for a new age of applied science, as it was recognized that yesterday's solutions had become the problems of the present. There were clear signs that society's accelerating development was bumping against limits to growth. So the federal government's Research Applied to National Needs program, which began in 1970, was to address the impacts that science and technology had upon the environment. Much of its focus was on fostering less impactful alternative technologies, such as those powered by the sun, wind, and Earth's tides. In a sense, RAN was a first run at de-accelerating the Great Acceleration. The environmental problems it addressed were necessarily interdisciplinary. Energy demand and pollution linked thermodynamics and chemistry to the airborne transport of particulate matter and to the subjective appetites of a growing population, its material culture, and the diktats of its guiding economic theories. Such problems already put paid to the idea that there could be a clear division between the natural and the social sciences. Other moves towards interdisciplinarity came from the sciences themselves. Like humankind, the sciences had grown and diversified. Physics had broken into subfields such as bio, astro, and geophysics, making it hard to distinguish where one discipline ended and another began. The computer also drove this drive towards interdisciplinarity, as labor-intensive partial differential equations could now be automated and calculated at high speed, meaning for the first time that advanced mathematical functions, quantitative modeling, and simulation could be applied to a diverse array of research subjects. What about the third wave of interdisciplinarity we now find ourselves in? Here you see the root of a birch tree that has been permeated by microplastics. It's the work of artist and chemist Kat Austin, an interdisciplinary researcher who both exhibits in galleries and publishes in scientific journals. Why does the state of the planet demand such new kinds of interdisciplinarity? As I mentioned at the outset, in an Anthropocene Earth, the fiction of a purely natural science has ended, while the humanities and the arts now must also recognize that their objects of inquiry, their ideas and their visions have always been and will continue to be shaped by the environmental conditions in which they find themselves. Put simply, in an Anthropocene Earth, there can be no purely natural science and no purely social science, just as there can be no art that's free from science and no science that fails to acknowledge its role in the creation of a new and urgent planetary aesthetic. So the founding of the UIC Anthropocene Lab is an articulation of these new imperatives, and I really look forward to seeing how it responds to this new reality and helps inform the reality that is unfolding. And I hope that the students and researchers that are there can help find new ways for the disciplines to flourish in changing times. Thank you.